So today we are going to be dealing with our mammoth zucchini haul. And honestly, right now I've got so much zucchini coming in that this is almost a daily occurrence. This is about 2.5 days worth of zucchini harvest, and I've got more to harvest today. So I'm gonna be sharing with you all of the different ways that we can both preserve zucchini and my favorite ways to use it fresh. I feel like that's kind of the glory and point of homesteading and growing your own food, is to have all of it fresh and in season, and then also putting up the bounty. So this is gonna be a little bit of both. So first step today is I am going to be, which is why we have this bad boy out, I'm gonna be grating all of this up. My family loves chocolate zucchini muffins. In fact, it is a request all the time for breakfast, dessert, you name it. So pretty much throughout the harvest season, we just have these, I bake them every week. And then I like to shred this up because, as you can see, there's only a few left here. So I need to make up another batch, but I like to also shred up a whole bunch and have it in the freezer if you don't have a freeze dryer. If you have a freeze dryer, which is what I'm gonna be doing with these today, I'm gonna be freeze drying this, but you can do the same thing in your freezer. Obviously it just has to stay in the freezer. The beautiful part about the freeze drying is once it's freeze dried, I can put it in jars and then it's shelf stable. So the nice thing about zucchini, I found when you're shredding it, is you don't need to pre-blanch it. Some food when you're freeze drying, especially when you are freezing it in the deep freezer when it comes to your vegetables, you need to blanch it to stop enzyme activity, or when you take it out a few months down the road, it has an odd texture and flavor and it never cooks quite right. However, I have not found that to be the case with shredded zucchini that I'm using in, baked goods, that type of thing, or even throwing it later in sauces or soups. So I never bother with blanching my shredded zucchini before freezing or freeze drying. So I have to tell you guys, I got a new toy. This is the Breville Sous Chef, and I bought it. It is not cheap. It's the most expensive food processor I've ever purchased, but my goodness, this baby is like a Cadillac, and I love it. If you can't tell, I'm like, it's so fast and it's so much bigger, and it has all these different attachments. Yes, I am that person. I get very excited about tools in the kitchen that make things faster, but it's so quiet, but it's so fast. I mean, look at that. We just shredded an entire zucchini. If I wasn't talking, that would have been in probably like 10 seconds. 10 seconds. So these are the bits that the chickens and the ducks love. So I just always set these aside for them and take them out later, and it's a nice little treat. You could try to put them back through, but when they're this small of pieces, I find they just don't get shredded. Now, you could simply shred these like this, so you can see how well these are shredded up. However, if you have a wonderful person in your family who has textural issues, like a 2-year-old, but they're not 2 anymore, I have to then pulse these with this part of the attachment so that they're not bothered by them. I apologize to his future wife already. So I don't want this all the way pureed, but you can see it's much finer chunks, but we've not like liquefied pureed this. So this is the texture that I go for when we're putting it into baked goods. And then also if I'm just wanting to throw this into different soups and sauces and stews, just to kind of sneak some more vegetables in there, this also works really great. So if you're just freezing these, then go ahead and put it into whatever your freezer container is, seal it up, and pop it in the freezer. If you have a vacuum sealer to freeze it, that works really well too. I've done it that way, but because we are freeze drying this, and you can see this was just one, I'd say medium-sized zucchini. And so we're just gonna, you never want to go over the rim, we always want it to be inside the tray. So I'm just gonna kind of smooth that and make sure we're not sticking up and exceeding over, which we're not. So I found it's about 1 1/4 medium-sized zucchinis per tray is what I found that I can get in. And one of the things you'll want to keep in mind if you are doing this with the freeze dryer, you don't want to get any of the really large zucchini that have really large seeds in them already, that have developed those large seeds. So like this one, I will not use for freeze drying because if I cut this open, it's going to have really large seeds. And seeds are one of those funny things with freeze drying that it'll show it's done, but if something's really seedy, because obviously the seeds are denser than the outside of, or the inside of the zucchini too, but the other parts of the zucchini is what I was trying to say. And so they hold more moisture and everything else can be dry, but those seeds won't be as dry. And so oftentimes when people are freeze drying items with seeds, they'll go ahead and package it thinking that everything is good to go. Then they'll go to open it and they'll find that there's been some mold development. So ideally, I just don't even bother with anything that has large seeds to avoid that problem. So these can be great for fresh eating. You can definitely go ahead and shred this up if you're just going to be baking the items right then and there, or in your regular freezer. Not a good idea for the freeze dryer or dehydrator. So there's lots of ways that you can actually preserve zucchini. Obviously today we're just doing this all up in shredded form, but you can spiralize the zucchini and dehydrate it. That works really well for doing like zucchini, the zoodles later. I've done that, we've really enjoyed that. And then of course, just having it chopped up in chunks, you can freeze that. That I like to do when I'm adding it to soups and stews and that type of thing. I also will freeze dry it in that format. And I've really liked that. But beyond dehydrating, freeze drying, or freezing, some of the other ways is you can zucchini safely in pickled format. So you can't pressure can jars of just straight zucchini. It's a density issue. It's so mushy that it gets so mushy that it's not a great end product. And then there's also danger of it because it's so mushy, the heat not fully penetrating. For botulism prevention. So we don't want to just pressure can straight jars of summer squash. That was pulled from safe canning in the 90s actually. But you can pickle zucchini and there's quite a few recipes that will say if you can sub zucchini in for cucumber. And where I find I like zucchini pickled best in recipes is if it's in a relish type recipe or like a cubed chunk format. And so in my mustard pickle recipe, that is one that you can safely sub in zucchini. I've also done some fun zucchini relishes. And so I have a video of making the mustard pickles, which is one of our favorite recipes. The recipe for that will have linked beneath this video as well. But that is a fabulous recipe to throw zucchini in place of cucumbers. And I also have a blog post that has a link to a bunch of safe canning recipes that you can incorporate zucchini in. So I'll make sure and link in that in the video description for you as well. So we've got all of our zucchini prepped to go in the freeze dryer. So this was about 7 zucchini because I had a couple smaller ones. As I said, it's about 1.5 medium per tray. However, I still have a plethora of zucchini here. So some of our favorite ways to eat this fresh is to grill it. If you have not done grilled zucchini, oh my friend, you are gonna love this. So simply take your zucchini. It works best with a medium to small, just again, so you don't have those big seeds. And so you're going to cut it lengthwise. And if it's on the more medium size, you can cut that lengthwise again, so it would be in quarters. If it's some of the really like smaller ones like this, I would just simply cut it in half lengthwise. Then all you do is just take a little bit of olive oil and lightly coat it with olive oil, and then salt, a little bit of garlic powder, and a little bit of pepper. grill it just until it's soft and has some grill marks. Pull that off. This is the important part. When it's still hot, right when you've pulled it off after it's been grilled, put a little bit of grated Parmesan on top and then let it cool. Now my husband likes to dip his in ranch, which I have an awesome homemade ranch dressing mix and recipe if you want to check that out. I like it just with the grated Parmesan on it. I mean, we will devour an entire plate and easily grill up at least 2 to 3 every night. That's probably my favorite fresh way, aside from, of course, all the different baked good yumminess. As I said, I've got a blog post though that has 144 ways, including preserving, but also fresh eating, different recipes and ways to use zucchini. So if you have been blessed with a plethora of it, you will have plenty of ways to put it to use both now and to use throughout the winter months. Okay, these 4 trays are done. So time to start packaging them. Now, with freeze-dried food, you can package them in Mylar or in mason jars. I have to say, I prefer mason jars. I mean, big surprise, like mason jars are my love language, and I have them for all my other types of food preservation too. But I don't even use the Mylar bags. I like the mason jars because I can reuse the same thing over and over again for lots of different things. I prefer glass, and I have not had any storage issues using the mason jars versus using the Mylar bags. Now, in all honesty, the freeze-dried food, I'm more interested in using this for our fresh harvest every year. So I really only am planning on my freeze-dried food lasting us, when it comes to our fresh produce and stuff, about 2 years max, 2 to 3 years. Freeze-dried food does have a shelf life of up to 25 years, but we eat from our food storage. So for me, that's not really the purpose of ours. So I just prefer to use the mason jars. And what's really nice is with the freeze-dried food, unlike with canning, I can use my big half gallons and I can get a lot in there. Perfect. So 2 trays is just right for our half-gallon jar here. Okay, we have our last 2 trays here in our jar. So we are going to vacuum seal this. I found if it's something like freeze-dried fruit that we're gonna be eating in the next like month or so, I just will put the lid on and tighten the band down really tight. However, if it's something that I know we're not gonna be consuming in a fast period of time, and it's very unlikely that I would go through an entire half-gallon of zucchini in a month's time. So we are gonna vacuum seal this up. Now, if you have a vacuum sealer that has an attachment electric one, those work well too. But for small things like this, I really like this little vacuum sealer with just this hand pump from 4 jars. I find this is much faster for me to use for just 2 jars than to drag out my entire electric machine. So we simply are gonna put that on over our lid, and then you just line up these 2 holes like that. And you wanna press down so you have good contact, and then you're gonna pump. And as soon as this gets hard to pump, which really doesn't take very long, then you know that it is sealed and it's getting harder to pump. You can see my white knuckled grip there. There we go. Yes. Okay. That's fully suctioned. Break it. There we go. We're going to remove this off. And then we're going to test it. So I test it the same way I do my canning jars to make sure they're sealed. And I'm lifting this only by the weight of the lid. It is nice and sealed. Now I do put a band on and tighten it down just in case this vacuum seal were to come off in storage and this was something I wasn't going to be pulling off the shelf for 9 months, that the pressure of the band would still help to keep it sealed and we wouldn't have any air and moisture, oxygen getting in and causing any issues. So unlike my jars of canned food that I don't store with bands on, I do store my freeze-dried food with the bands on. So these will go on the shelf now, but I wanted to show you, these are chunks that I did last year. So these are over a year old. They're still very bright in their color, both the white and also our rind. And they're still nice and crunchy. So one of the great thing about the freeze-dried food is we can completely use these in their freeze-dried form. And that's really nice with zucchini because there's a lot of recipes if you're using zucchini where you're squeezing out all of the moisture. And I like to use the freeze-dried zucchini. You can powder it and then use it as flour. So if you've ever done low carb or no carb baking and you've tried to use zucchini, sometimes it's just so wet, even if you've squeezed it, that it's hard to use. So I will use this as thickeners in sauces and soups, and then even as a portion of flour and some of my recipes in the dough. So it works really nice like that. However, when I'm putting it into soups and stews and sauces that are gonna be simmering for a little bit, same thing. I don't reconstitute it. I just measure out what it is we want, put it in with the liquid and let it simmer and cook in that way, and we're just good to go. However, if I'm using it for like zucchini muffins or zucchini bread or something like that, then I do reconstitute it because those recipes are counting on getting moisture from the zucchini to get your desired texture and for it to be a good end product. So what's really nice is this can go both ways and serve multiple needs.